Well, as this week we've been talking about certain specific behaviors that are supposed to characterize the Christian, and a lot of those things deal with stuff that, well, really are harder to live out than we immediately recognize. I mean, sometimes it's hard to speak the truth and be completely honest, and particularly when we're called to confront things that are not true. It's often difficult not to get angry and resentful because of something that someone has done to you or said about you, or a way in which they've acted to you. Or we talked about the issue of stealing. Especially I talked about how that if we are an employee, we have an obligation to do our jobs, even if our jobs aren't fun and entertaining, because we're selling our time for a wage to somebody else, and we need to give them a fair exchange of the time and the energy that we're required to put out. And then we talked about the problem of words, unwholesome words that kind of simply tear down rather than build up. Now, again, we had talked about kind of parsing this correctly, because sometimes when we speak the truth to someone, they get angry and resentful and they feel insulted, but we're to be truthful. And if we do that, we're to say it in a way that's not unwholesome, but try to find ways that we can say that builds that person up and encourages them, that we don't just identify what they do wrong, but we try to help them to figure out, how can I change this trajectory in my life? And then yesterday we talked about grieving the Holy Spirit. There's about how that we can vex God when we begin to act as if we own our life and it's our own to do what we want. But where we are now is really, as I say, this hole for me gets deeper and deeper. I mean, where he said, "Let all bitterness, wrath, and anger, clamor, and slander be put away from you, along with all malice." What is bitterness? Well, the word originally talks about basically anything that's acidic and sour and pungent, but it's talking about acidic, sour, pungent resentment. And I think resentment is probably the closest equivalent word that we have, that it's really things that create a sour disposition. Now, when we get wounded or offended, that's not necessarily the same as bitterness, because bitterness is a resentment that is allowed to age and to brew on the inside of us, to basically ferment on the inside. And as a result, when that really takes over, we begin to be people who are, we just bear bitter fruit in our life. I mean, it becomes distinguished. We talk about people who have a sour personality. They're just mad at the world. That's coming out of a deep resentment that they've never reconciled, and either may not want to reconcile or don't even know how to. And one of the things that I think that Paul makes really clear, as we'll get to tomorrow, is that Christ is our example. So when I look at Jesus on the cross, I think to myself, and he's saying, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." There's no other statement that more declares his divinity than that one. Because it is normal, it is human to become bitter and resentful. It's divine to forgive, as the poet once wrote. So when Paul says to us here, he says, let go of all that bitterness and the stuff that bitterness produces. And that's what the rest of these things are. When it produces wrath, extreme anger and rage. I remember I was talking to somebody that I just happened to run into, and all of a sudden they just exploded all over me, and I was kind of stunned. And to this day, I don't really know what that was all about. But this person obviously had a deep root of bitterness towards me, and it just came out. Suddenly we're having this conversation, and suddenly all this anger and raging started coming out of them. If I'd had more presence of mind, I probably said, "Whoa, what is it that I've done to you?" But actually, be quite honest, I was so shocked that I just said, "Okay, there we go," and I just walked away. And I've never seen the person since, so I feel like that was a missed opportunity. But I'm just saying that when you have those kind of reactions, when you're a husband or a wife and suddenly you blow up at your spouse and get angry with them, and your anger and rage is not proportionate to whatever the person said or did, you realize that you've been nursing resentment for a long time. The word anger really means just simply hostility, that you look at that person with a hostility. And we've all been around people who we can just tell that they don't enjoy us, they don't like us, they have just a hostile attitude towards us, and they're not friendly. Now, there are some people who are just so generally resentful that they react angrily and they are hostile towards other people. We've all encountered those people who just rage on everyone and everything because they're just so filled and overtaken with bitterness. But then there's also, thirdly, he says there's clamor. That's where clamor means you're yelling, you're raising your voice. And have you ever noticed how when you're really kind of struggling with something that the range and the pitch and the volume of your voice starts going up and you don't even realize it, but you're actually kind of shouting at the other person? And that's what clamor is. It's when we find us behaving clamorously, the answer isn't to rearrange the person we're talking to's face or personality. The answer is to really look inside and saying, where is this anger coming from? What is it rooted in? Why am I so resentful towards this other person? And then that fourthly, he throws in again our friend slander and gossip. I mean, slander is basically defamation of a person's character. We call it a character assassination. That when we are bitter against somebody else, we can't help if their face, their name, or you see them in the distance come up, immediately what comes out of you is again anger and clamor. You just feel your temperature going up. You feel your veins tightening, and that's really leads to us saying very kind and depreciating things about another person. And then the fifth thing he talks about is malice. If you're bitter, you're going to be wrathful, you're going to be angry, you're going to be clamorous in your speech, you're going to be slanderous in your statements, but you're also going to be malicious. In other words, what you really desire, and this really gets down to emotions and motives, you desire to punish, to injure, to hurt, to defame that person. I've talked to people who have really expressed to me, I just want to see them suffer. I want to see that other person suffer. And that's maliciousness on the inside. And again, what he's saying is these are things that grieve the Holy Spirit. These are things that will quench the power of God in your life and limit your capacity to be used by Him. And it's important that when we see these things coming out of us or being expressed through us, that we really pull back, and instead of verbalizing or vocalizing or acting on those emotions, we really go into basically find a prayer closet someplace where we can get alone with God and say, God, why am I so angry? Why am I so resentful? And that may not even be a question you have to ask. You may remember very quickly, I hate them so much because of what they did. Well, that's a place where we start. But tomorrow I want to continue this conversation because he talks about how we get past that kind of feeling towards other people. How do we get free from bitterness? And we'll explore that tomorrow. And so I'll look forward to finishing out the week by talking about how we can get free from the bitterness that oftentimes spoils our entire lives. God bless you and go in His grace.